My name is Charlotte Onstad, and I am 37 years old. At 11:40 on a Sunday night in February, I was sitting in my truck in the hospice parking lot with the heater running, 12 hours into the wrong end of a shift when my phone started buzzing and would not stop. It was the family thread. 13 people. My sister Dorothy had opened it with a sentence that read like a church committee agenda, and the first line I actually understood was from my sister Margie. Point of order. They were voting on whether I would be allowed to attend my niece's wedding. Not discussing. Voting. Yes or no, one person at a time, with their names attached. In a thread they were absolutely certain I had already been removed from. It took them 26 minutes. I sat in that lot with my hands on the wheel and read every single message as it came in. I did not screenshot one of them. I did not type a word. 3 weeks later, at my father's memorial supper, I stood up at my sister's dining room table and said the one thing I had promised a dying man I would never say. And 11 people in that thread still cannot look at me in the grocery store. Welcome back to Wise Family Revenge. This is where we sit with the quiet ones, the women who kept the peace for years and finally added up what it cost them. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I scrolled up to the top because I wanted to see how it started. Dorothy had written it the way she writes everything, which is like a woman who has chaired a funeral committee for 19 years and expects the minutes to be kept. Given the circumstances and for the sake of the day, I think we should decide together whether Charlie attends. That was it. No name-calling, no accusation, just a motion on the floor, made at 11:38 at night, with a period at the end of it. Margie answered inside of a minute. Point of order, she wrote. Are we doing a simple majority or does it need to be everybody? My family has never once had a problem that a motion couldn't solve. We vote on the Easter breakfast menu. We vote on which cousin hosts Thanksgiving. When our mother died, we voted on the casket lining, and I remember Margie counting hands in a funeral home hallway with a pen behind her ear. So nobody in that thread thought they were doing anything cruel. That is the part that took me the longest to understand, sitting there with the heater blowing on my knuckles and the windshield going soft with frost around the edges. They thought they were being fair. They thought fair was the opposite of cruel. Paul asked whether we were voting on the ceremony or the reception or both. Dorothy said both, and added that Bex had enough on her plate and did not need to be involved, which is how I learned that the bride, my niece, the girl who slept on my couch for 2 nights the winter her dog died, had not been asked either. There were 13 people in that thread. 12 of them were about to vote. The 13th was me, sitting in a parking lot in Rockridge with a badge still clipped to my scrub top, watching my own name come up for a show of hands. This was not an argument. This was a procedure. The votes came in one at a time, and every one of them was polite. That is what I want you to understand about my family. Nobody said they hated me. Paul went first. Yes. Sorry, kiddo, but yes. My brother is 49 years old and he framed the drywall in my kitchen for free, and he still called me kiddo while he checked a box. Janine typed yes with no capital letter. Ray wrote yes with a thumbs up, which I have thought about more than I should. Trish, who is 30 and has a 2-year-old, wrote that Bex deserves a calm day and that she loved me and that this was not about the past. Then yes. Carol, my uncle's wife, sent yes with a little bouquet of flowers after it. Kyle just wrote Y. Nathan wrote whatever Trish said. My brother-in-law Jerry, who has known me since I was 11, started typing and stopped 4 times. I watched those 3 gray dots appear and disappear like a pulse on a monitor. He finally sent yes at 11:56 with no punctuation at all, and then he left the thread quiet for a while, and I understood that he had gone into another room. Every one of them wrote something kind first. Love her, but she'll understand. It's just one day. I have sat with a lot of families in a lot of small rooms, and I have learned that people are never crueler than when they have decided that they are being reasonable. My hands were fine. That surprised me. I was steady enough to have started an IV. Then, 1 minute before midnight, somebody in that thread typed something that was not yes, and for 3 full minutes, not a single person in my family said anything at all. It was Denny. My Uncle Denny is 74 years old. He carried rural mail out of the Vernon Falls post office for 31 years. And he wrote no. And then he wrote Walt would be ashamed of this. And then he did not write anything else for the rest of the night. Theo went second. Theo is 22. He is Dorothy's son. He is Bex's little brother. And he wrote no. And then he wrote, "This is insane." And his mother did not answer him in the thread. She answered him some other way, and I would find that out later. Margie waited 5 minutes and then closed it out like a secretary reading back the minutes. "That's 11 to 2, she wrote. "Sharon says yes, she doesn't text. I asked her at choir this morning. So my father's sister, who is 66 years old and who taught me to drive a stick shift in a church parking lot, voted against me by proxy between the second hymn and the offering." Then Dorothy wrote the last message of the night. "It's not personal. It's just what everybody wanted." I read that sentence maybe 9 times. I want to be honest with you about what I felt, because I think people expect something dramatic here. I did not feel rage. I felt the specific cold, small feeling of being counted. Like inventory. Like a chair nobody needed at a table that was already full. I turned my phone face down on the passenger seat. I drove the 2 miles out County Road K to my father's house, which is my house now, and I let myself in through the porch and stood in the dark kitchen with my coat still on. I did not block them. I did not leave the thread. I did not answer. And I want to be clear that this was not grace. I stayed in that thread because I wanted to know exactly how far they were willing to take it. I went to work the next morning at 6, because that is what I do. I am a hospice nurse. 12 years, the last 8 of them as a case manager at Bellwether Hospice House, which sits on a rise outside Rockridge about 20 minutes from my kitchen, and which has 8 beds and a garden that nobody can keep the deer out of. That Monday, I had Alvin Prine in room 4. 81, potato farmer, hands like split oak, and a few weeks at the outside if I had to put money on it. Alvin took his tea with too much sugar and a slice of lemon he never ate. His dog was named Ruby and had been dead since 2019, and he liked to be told she was outside. His oldest son cried in the hallway, and his middle son cried in the parking lot, and his daughter did not cry at all, which is usually the one you have to watch. I know these things because knowing them is the job. I can walk into a room and tell you inside 2 minutes who is going to shout, who is going to ask about the will, and who is going to go quiet and stay quiet for the next 30 years. I am very good at other people's worst week. I have never once been good at my own. That morning, I checked Alvin's syringe driver, changed his water, told him Ruby was out chasing something in the corn, and stood in the doorway watching his chest go up and down while my phone sat silent in my pocket. At 8 o'clock it buzzed. It was Bex. "Cake tasting Saturday," she wrote. And then a photo of 4 little squares of frosting on a paper plate. And then, "You're coming, right? Because Sam has no opinions and I need an adult." My niece did not know. Nobody had told her a thing. Here is the part that I still think is funny, in the way that things are funny at 2 in the morning. They tried to remove me. Theo built that group chat in the spring of 2022, a month after my father's funeral, so the family could settle the headstone without 11 separate phone calls, and he built it the easy way, and it swept in every number in the family, including my Uncle Denny's. Denny has an Android. He has had the same one since roughly the Obama administration, and he will tell you at length that he does not need a computer in his pocket. Because Denny is in that thread, the whole thing runs on plain text messages instead of the fancy blue kind. And in a plain text group, nobody can take anybody out. You can leave. You cannot be removed. Dorothy tried on the Thursday before the vote. I know because Theo told me, and because Dorothy is not a woman who reads error messages. She held her finger down on my name. She chose remove. And her phone told her politely that it could not do that, and she put the phone face down and went on with her evening believing she had handled it. So the whole vote happened in front of me for one reason. My 74-year-old uncle will not buy an iPhone. That is the entire mechanism. That is the accident. But when I scrolled back that Monday night, sitting on the floor of my father's kitchen with my back against the dishwasher, I found something worse than the vote. In 4 years, that thread had discussed me 9 separate times. Not the vote. Before the vote. Whether to seat me at Christmas, whether to let me speak at the graveside, whether it was better if I skipped the baptism. Just this once. And every one of those 9 conversations ended the same way, in the same words, from one person or another. Let's not make it a thing. My father's garage is unheated and smells like sawdust and cold motor oil, and I go out there more than I should. Walter Onstad. Born 1943, died the 9th of March 2022, 78 years old, a Finnish carpenter for 51 of them. He built the pews in the side chapel at Redeemer Lutheran and half the kitchen cabinets in Vernon Falls. And toward the end his hands shook so badly he had to hold his right wrist with his left hand to sign a check. Against the back wall, under a gray moving blanket, is a cedar chest. He started it in the summer of 2021. Cedar, dovetailed, with a lid he cut from one board because he said a 2-board lid was a lie you told yourself. 3 panels were never fitted. On the underside of that lid, in carpenter's pencil, in his shaky block letters, it says, "For Bex," and under that, a date. He never told anybody he was building it. I found it after the funeral, when I came out here to look for a socket set and sat down on the floor instead for about an hour. I have been sanding that chest for 4 years. 4 years, a little at a time, always stopping before the last part. I could tell you I was busy. The last real thing my father asked me was one short sentence, and I have never repeated it to a living soul. Don't make them carry it. He said it on a Tuesday afternoon with the blinds half open and a cup of ice chips going soft on the tray table, and he made me say yes out loud. And then he closed his eyes like a man who had finally set something down. Everything that happened after that, every quiet Christmas and every skipped baptism and every one of those 11 votes, comes out of those words and what I did with them. Tuesday morning, Denny's truck came up the driveway with the muffler he has been meaning to fix since 2019, and he got out holding 2 gas station coffees like a man delivering a subpoena. He does not knock. He came into the garage, handed me one, and stood there in his mail carrier's insulated boots, looking at the cedar chest with the blanket half off it. "I voted no," he said. "I know," I said. "So did Theo," he said. "I know that too." He drank some coffee. "Dorothy's got that boy over a barrel," he said. "Told him if he keeps stirring he can watch the wedding from a folding chair instead of standing up in it." Then Denny looked at the chest for a while longer, and at the pencil on the underside of the lid, which he had never seen before, and something went across his face. He is not a talker. He carried mail through 31 Wisconsin winters, and he has maybe 400 words in him on a good day. What he said was this: nobody votes on the people they actually love. He said it to the chest, not to me. Then he asked me what I was going to do, and I told him I was going to go to work. He nodded like that was an answer, which it was not. The wedding is the 11th of April. That morning it was 8 weeks out. 8 weeks. A barn already booked. A dress already altered. 200 cocktail napkins with an R and an S on them, sitting in a box in Bex's apartment above the hardware store. And there was one more thing sitting out there that I had not told Denny about, because I had not decided what to do with it yet. The week before the vote, my niece had asked me a question, and I still had not given her an answer. Dorothy called me at 7 on Wednesday evening. My sister does not text me. She has not texted me directly since 2022, but she will call, and she will use the voice she uses for the parish newsletter, warm and level and completely closed. She asked about my week. She asked whether the furnace out at Dad's had made it through the cold snap. Then she said, "We think it's best if you sit this one out." Not I think. We. There was no vote mentioned, because as far as Dorothy knew, I was a woman standing in a dark kitchen who had no idea a vote had ever happened. She said it kindly. She said Bex deserves a day where nobody is watching the room. She said April is going to be hard enough. And then she got to the actual reason she had picked up the phone. "And I need you to tell Bex you're on shift," she said. "She'll take it from you. She won't take it from me." I stood there with my hand flat on the counter my father built, and I did not say anything for what felt like a long time. 7 seconds, maybe. I have counted a lot of seconds in a lot of rooms. She wanted me to lie to the bride so that nobody else would have to be the one who told her. That was the ask. Not stay home. Stay home and handle the paperwork of staying home. I said, I'll think about it. Dorothy said, thank you, in the tone she uses when emotion carries. Then she said the thing I keep coming back to, and she meant it as a compliment. You've always been able to take things, Charlie. That's your gift. After she hung up, I stood there another minute. Then I turned around and looked at the April schedule magneted to the front of the refrigerator, and at the 11th, which I had circled in November. Thursday afternoon, Alvin Prine's 3 children had a fight in our hallway about a nursing home bill from 2023. Not loudly. Bellwether has soft carpet and everybody whispers, which somehow makes it worse. The daughter said the middle son had never once driven up from Madison. The middle son said the daughter had power of attorney and had never explained a single statement. And then the oldest said the sentence that put my back against the wall. Look, we just need to agree on who's going in there, because he can't have all of us. 3 adults in a corridor deciding, on behalf of a man 40 feet away, who was allowed to be in the room with him. They were not monsters. They were tired and scared, and they had found a procedure to hide inside. I stood there holding a chart I did not need, and heard my own family talking in somebody else's voices. So I did what I always do. I opened the door, and I asked Alvin who he wanted. He said, all of them. They're just loud. If you have ever stood in a hallway while other people decided who was allowed inside a room, you already know exactly how that feels. Tell me in the comments whether you said something, or whether you kept the peace. I read every one of them. And if this channel is your kind of quiet, go ahead and subscribe. I drove home that night on County Road K with the heater rattling, and when I got in, I opened my laptop to sign up for the Easter breakfast kitchen shift at Redeemer, the way I have every March since I was 19 years old. The sheet was already posted. 6 names, 4 slots, 2 backups. Mine was not on it, and there was no space left where it used to be. I drove into town Wednesday of the following week and went into the fellowship hall at Redeemer, where Margie was stacking sheet pans in the way she stacks everything, largest to smallest, handles all facing out. My sister Margie is 52 and runs the parish gift shop and is the least frightening person in my family, which is why she is the one who does this kind of thing. She saw me and smiled with real warmth, because she does have real warmth, and that is what makes her difficult. I asked about the Easter sheet. Oh, she said, we just rebalanced it. You've been carrying too much for years, Charlie. Everybody says so. I said I would like to be on it. She kept stacking pans. She said, I think it's better if we let the season settle. Let the season settle. 19 years of getting up at 4 in the morning to crack 600 eggs into a hotel pan, and I have been rebalanced. I asked her, straight, without any edge in it, why? And Margie stopped, and put both hands flat on a pan, and said the sentence that told me everything about what was actually going on in this town. You've got to see how it looks, Charlie. So I asked her how it looks. I asked it quietly, and I waited, and I let it get uncomfortable, because I wanted to hear one person in my family say the thing out loud instead of writing it in a thread. She did not answer. She looked at the door, then at the coffee urns. Then she went to the counter and came back with a plastic clamshell of leftover bars from the funeral lunch on Saturday, and put it in my hands like a woman handing a coat to somebody she is walking to the door. Take these, she said. The boys won't eat them. And that was how I learned. There was a version of me walking around Vernon Falls that I had never met. Bex came by at 6:40 on Friday morning, straight off a night on the ambulance, still smelling like disinfectant and cold air, and let herself in the back door the way she has since she was 16. My niece is 26. I am 11 years older than she is, which is a strange gap, too small for aunt and too big for sister, and it means that I changed her diapers and also taught her to parallel park and also sat in a hospital cafeteria with her at 2 in the morning during her EMT clinicals, telling her that everybody drops the first laryngoscope. She sat down at my kitchen table in her uniform pants and put her head on her arms for a second, and then she said, "I have a favor." She wanted me to do the reading at the ceremony. Not a toast. The reading. In the church. In front of everyone. And she had already picked the passage and printed it out and folded it into a square in her jacket pocket. She slid it across the table. I looked at that folded piece of paper for longer than a person should look at a folded piece of paper. And then I heard myself say, "Let me look at my schedule." Beck said sure, no rush, and drank her coffee, and told me the caterer had gone out of business and been replaced by a woman named Dolores, who would only do chicken. Then, on her way out, she stopped with her hand on the door and said something else. She said, "You know what's weird? I sat with Grandpa twice that last week, and nobody ever told me anything. Not what he had, not what was happening. Nothing. Everybody just kept saying he was comfortable." She said it lightly, the way you say a thing you have not decided how to feel about. Then she left. She was gone by 10 after 7, and I sat there until the coffee went cold. The last 3 days of my father's life, he was more awake than he had been in a month. That happens. It is not a miracle and it is not a rally. It is just a body letting go of the effort of fighting, and if you have sat with the dying, you have seen it. On the 7th of March 2022, he ate half a cup of applesauce and told me the name of the man who sold him his first table saw. All 3 of those days he asked for Dorothy. He asked in the morning and again after lunch and again when the sun went down behind the water tower. And each time I said she was on her way, because she was. On the night of the 8th, she finally came, and then she did not come in. She sat in the parking lot. My sister sat in her Buick under the light pole outside Bellwether for 2 hours. I could see the car from the window at the end of the East Hall. She called me from it, and her voice came out of her in pieces, and what she said was, "Is he awake? I can't, Charlie, is he awake?" And I looked down the hall at room 6, where my father was lying with the blinds half open and his eyes open too, waiting for his oldest daughter, and I said, "He's out, Dot. Come tomorrow." I told her he was sleeping. I did it in about 2 seconds, without 1 minute of thought, because I have spent my whole adult life shortening other people's worst nights, and because she sounded like a woman who was going to break apart in a parking lot. He had already asked me for the thing I would never repeat. I thought I was carrying it well. I was 33 years old, and I honestly believed that what I had just done was a kindness. Theo showed up in the garage doorway on Saturday with his ears red from the cold and his phone already in his hand. He is 22 and built like his father, and he has never in his life been able to hide what he is feeling. He said, "I'm sending it to Bex. All of it. The whole thread. She should know what they did." And I said no. He said, "Why not?" And I said, "Not from you, and not like that." I told him what happens to the person who forwards the thread. I have watched it in 100 families over 12 years. The one who tells becomes the story. Everybody gets to be furious at the messenger instead of at the message, and by Christmas the whole thing has been reorganized into a fight about Theo. He argued with me. He said, "Aunt Charlie, you can't vote people out of a family," and he said it the way a 22-year-old says a true thing, too loud, standing in a cold garage. I did not correct him out loud. But you can. That is the whole problem. People do it constantly, and they live perfectly comfortable lives afterward, and they sleep fine. Then he told me the part I did not know. His mother and father are paying for the barn, the tent, the bar, and most of Dolores and her chicken. Nearly 2/3 of the whole thing. Dorothy had said to him, in the kitchen, that when you write the checks you get a say in the room. Theo said it like it was proof of something. To me, it just explained the arithmetic. Money is how a person converts an opinion into a rule. He put his phone back in his pocket, finally, and went out to his car, and then he turned around in the driveway and came halfway back and asked me a question I did not have an answer for. "Do you even want to go?" That night, I went out to the garage at 9 and I did not come in until almost 2. I fitted the last 3 panels. Cedar is soft and forgiving, and it smells like every closet at my grandmother's house, and my father had cut those panels 4.5 years ago and left them leaned against the wall in the order he meant to use them, which is a thing only a Finnish carpenter would do. They still fit. I glued and clamped and waited and waxed the lid with the same tin of paste wax he bought at the hardware store on Main, which still had his thumbprint in it. Then I stood there at 1 in the morning with a shop light hanging off a nail, looking at a finished chest for the first time, and I understood that I had been dragging out the sanding for 4 years because as long as it was not done, I did not have to decide what to do with it. In the morning, Denny came back and the two of us carried it out and set it in the bed of my truck, and I wedged 2 moving blankets around it and dropped the tailgate shut. That was the plan, and it was a coward's plan, and I knew it while I was making it. I would find a quiet minute before the wedding. I would put the chest in Bex's hands. I would tell her it was from her grandfather, and then I would step back out of all of it forever without one argument or one explanation, the graceful exit. Denny asked if I wanted him to keep it at his place. I said no. Theo had asked me the night before whether I even wanted to go, and standing there in the cold with my hands on the tailgate, I finally had the answer. I wanted to go. I just was not going to beg for it. That chest rode around in the back of my truck for the next 41 days. I found out what the town thought of me at the checkout at Farm and Fleet, standing behind a woman buying chicken feed. Her name is Bonnie Lasker, and she has sung alto at Redeemer since before I was born. She turned around and saw me, and her whole face went soft in a way I did not like at all. She put her hand on my arm. "You did what you thought was right, honey," she said. "Nobody blames you. Nobody blames you." I got out to my truck and sat there for a minute with the chest under the blankets behind me, and I worked it backward. The way you work backward from a symptom. Nobody blames you only gets said to a person everybody has decided is guilty of something. So I made myself think about what the guilt would have to be, and I got there fast, because it is the only version of my father's death that a town could pass around at a card party. He had a defibrillator in his chest for the last 6 years of his life. It went off. It went off a lot at the end, and then it stopped going off, and then he died. And I was the daughter in the room. In Vernon Falls, that is not a medical decision. That is a woman who turned off her father's heart. I traced it back further. 4 years ago, at the funeral lunch in the fellowship hall, at table 2, my sister Dorothy said one sentence to 3 women holding coffee cups. Just one. Margie told me the words years later, and I did not understand at the time what she was handing me. Dorothy said, "We weren't consulted. That is all. Not an accusation. Nothing you could ever call a lie. Just a door left open in a small town, and 4 years for people to walk through it." Jerry caught me in the co-op parking lot on the 2nd of March with a 50-pound bag of grass seed on his shoulder. My brother-in-law is 58 and has the personality of a screen door, and I mean that with affection. He put the bag in his truck bed and did not look at me and said, "I owe you an apology." I said, "Okay." He said, "I voted yes, and I've felt sick about it since." And then he did what every decent person in this story did, which was to apologize and then immediately ask me to keep absorbing it. "Just let it be, Charlie," he said. "Please. She hasn't slept since November. She's up at 3, 4 in the morning, going through the boxes in the spare room." I asked what boxes. He said his wife has kept every one of my father's things that came home from the hospice in a plastic tub with the lid on, and she goes through it, and she still has Walt in her phone. She calls it, he said, his number. It's been reassigned to somebody in Eau Claire by now, or disconnected, I don't know. She calls it and listens and hangs up. Now, if you think Dorothy is guilty of nothing worse than grief, understand that this is a woman who 2 weeks earlier had run a vote on whether her sister was allowed in a church. Both things were true. That is the part people never believe. And standing there in the co-op lot with the wind coming across the lot flat and mean, I asked myself the question I could not put down for the next 8 days. If she truly believed I was the one who took him, why was she the one who could not sleep? Jerry got in his truck. He did not wave. The invitation came on the 3rd of March. My mailbox is out at the end of County Road K where the culvert is, and I pulled it out from between a seed catalog and a flyer for a gun raffle, and I knew what it was before I turned it over, because of the handwriting. Bex writes the way she drives, fast and slightly to the left. The envelope had my whole name on it, Charlotte Onstad, no Ms., because she has never once called me that in her life, and in the bottom corner she had stuck one of those cheap puffy stickers shaped like a dog. Boone was a brown mutt with one folded ear who died in January of 2018 and who my niece cried over on my sofa for 2 nights straight, and for 8 years now anything from her to me has had a dog on it somewhere. I stood at the end of my driveway in the wind and opened it right there like an idiot. Reception to follow at the Hollis barn. Please respond by March 20th. And a note on the back in ballpoint. Aunt Charlie, don't make me chase you. So I want you to see the position I was now in. I had been formally voted out of my niece's wedding by 11 adults, one of them by proxy from a choir loft. And I had been personally invited to that same wedding, by hand, by the only person whose wedding it actually was. Both of those things were true at the same time, and neither one of them canceled the other, and there was not one person on this earth I could talk to about it. I put the invitation in the glove box of my truck. It sat there for the rest of March, with a pane of back glass and 2 moving blankets between it and a cedar chest that said, "For Bex," in my dead father's handwriting. Dorothy came out to the house on the 4th of March, first time in 4 years. She parked in the driveway and got out and did not come past the second porch step, which is a decision a person makes on purpose. She had her good coat on. She said, "Beck sent you an invitation." I said she did. My sister nodded slowly, like a woman confirming a line item. Then she laid it out. And I will give her this. She did not pretend it was anything other than a negotiation. I could come. Back row, left side, by the doors. No photographs with the family, no receiving line, no head table, and I would leave the barn before the dancing. And in exchange, on the 8th, at Dad's supper, in front of everybody, I would stand up and apologize for what I did to Dad. Those were the words. "What you did to Dad?" I asked her, evenly. "Sorry for what, exactly?" "Say the thing. Say the sentence out loud on my porch in the daylight." She looked at the porch boards. She said, "You know what?" And when I did not fill the silence, when I just stood there and let it sit there between us and get heavier, she got annoyed. And she said it again, the same way she had written it at 11 at night in a group chat she thought I could not see. "It's not personal, Charlie. It's just what everybody wanted." She was down the steps and back in the car before I answered, and that is because Dorothy has never in her life needed anybody's answer. She has only ever needed the motion to carry. I stood on my father's porch and watched my sister back down my father's driveway, and for the first time in 4 years I understood that my silence was not a wall I was hiding behind. It was a wall I had built for her. On the 5th of March, Alvin Prine's daughter followed me out of room 4 and asked me to lie to her father. She wanted me to tell him the farm was fine. It was not fine. They had sold 400 acres to a dairy operation out of Blair in January, and Alvin had signed the papers himself in this building, on the tray table, with a pen I handed him. She said, "He doesn't remember signing, and it would kill him. And he only has a few days, and please." She was crying. I have had this exact conversation more times than I can count. I said no, and I said it as gently as I know how. I told her I would not bring it up, and I would not volunteer it, and I would never contradict her in that room. But if he asked me, I would tell him the truth, because he is the one dying and it is his information. And then I said the thing I have said to families for 12 years without ever once hearing it. They know. They almost always know. What we take from them, when we manage it, is the chance to say so out loud. I have watched a lot of families spend a person's last week protecting each other from the truth. It has never once worked. If you have ever been the one holding something quiet so that everybody else could stay comfortable, put a 1 in the comments. Subscribe, because the next part is where I stopped. I walked down to the medroom and stood there with my hand on the door and did not open it, because I had just heard myself, and because I finally understood what my sister was actually buying with that back row seat. She was not buying my presence. She was buying the last signature she needed on the version of my father's death that she could live with. I wrote it at 1 in the morning on the 6th, sitting on the floor of the garage with my back against the workbench and the shop light on and my thumbs going. I put all of it in there. The date at the end of August 2021, the cardiologist's name, the exact words on the form. What a defibrillator does to a man at the end, and how many times it did it to my father in one night. Dorothy's Buick under the light pole. Every single thing I had not said in 4 years, addressed to all 12 of them, in the thread they voted in, at an hour when it would be the first thing every one of them saw with their coffee. I read it back twice. It was accurate. It was devastating. My thumb was on the arrow. At 6 in the morning, Denny knocked on the side door of the garage because he had come by to drop off a jump box and had seen the light on from the road. I have known this man my entire life, and he has never once asked me if I was okay. He just stood there in the doorway. I handed him the phone. He read it all the way through, slowly, the way he reads everything, moving his lips a little. Then he handed it back and said, "You send that. You're just voting back." I said they deserve to know. He said, "Sure." And then he said it again, the thing he said to the cedar chest. "Nobody votes on the people they actually love. Don't you start." I sat there for a while after his truck pulled out. Then I selected the whole thing and deleted it, letter by letter, and watched the box go empty. I never took a screenshot. Not once, not of any of it, not the whole way through. I deleted that message at 6:11 in the morning, and I have never been more certain of anything and felt less relief about it. Bex texted me on the 6th of March at 9 in the morning. "Did you look at your schedule?" I sat in the break room at Bellwether with a cup of coffee going cold and typed, "I'm on shift that day," and I looked at it sitting there in the box, gray and unsent, and I thought about my sister on the phone saying she'll take it from you. That was the whole design. Dorothy had worked out that the cheapest way to keep her hands clean was to have me hand my niece the lie personally, in my own voice, with all the credibility I had built up over 26 years of showing up. I deleted it. I did not answer at all that morning, which is its own kind of coward, and I know it. But then I did something. I walked down the hall to the scheduling office and I asked Renata to pull me off the day shift on the 11th of April. She raised her eyebrows. "Because I have covered Easter and Christmas and every 4th of July since 2019, and I do not ask for weekends." I gave her the 2 Easter overnights in exchange, which is a terrible trade, and she took it before I could change my mind. I did not tell Bex. I did not tell Denny. I did not tell anybody. I want to be precise about what that was, because it was not a decision. It was the opposite. I still had no idea what I was going to do or what I was going to say to anybody. All I had done was refuse to build the answer out of a lie and buy myself the physical possibility of standing in a church on the 11th of April if it turned out I still could. 2 days later, my niece texted me a photo of her dress with the hem pinned, and I still had not told her whether I would read. On the night of the 7th, the Saturday before my father's supper, I drove into town and parked across from the hardware store on Main. Bex and Sam have the apartment on the 2nd floor, the one with the window air conditioner still in the frame in March, and the kitchen light was on. I could see the top of a cabinet door and somebody's arm moving. The chest was behind me under 2 blankets. I had the invitation in the glove box. It would have taken me 4 minutes. Up the outside stairs, knock, hand her the thing, say your grandpa made this for you and he wrote your name inside the lid, and then go home. I sat there for 20 minutes and did not open the door of my truck, and eventually the kitchen light went off, and I drove the 2 miles back out County Road K. In the garage, I put the tailgate down and lifted the lid of the chest and turned the shop light on it and read my father's pencil again. For Bex. And under it, in the same shaky block letters, the date he wrote it. September 2nd, 2021. I stood there holding the lid up with both hands, because I know exactly what happened that week. I was there. On the 31st of August 2021, my father sat in an office in Eau Claire with a cardiologist and said no to the third valve surgery. 2 days later, he went out to this garage and started building a wedding present for a granddaughter who did not have a fiancé yet. That is not a man giving up. Whatever else I did or did not do, he was not a man giving up. And every person in this family had been allowed to believe he was, for 4 years, because of me. The supper was the following night. I still did not know what I was going to say. My father's supper is on the 8th of March every year, at Dorothy's house on Larkspur Street, because that is where it has always been and because my sister does not relinquish things. It is not a party. It is a pot of the beef and barley he liked, and a photo board Margie assembles out of the same 40 pictures, and his chair left empty at the head of the table with nobody sitting in it, which is a custom that started by accident in 2023 and has since become a rule. I parked on the street. I did not park in the driveway, because the driveway is for family who are staying. I walked up with a jar of the pickled beans he used to eat straight out of the jar over the sink, and I handed them to Jerry at the door, and Jerry looked at me the way a man looks at weather coming. There were 14 of us in that house. Margie and Ray, Paul and Janine, Kyle in the corner on his phone, Trish and Nathan, no baby, thank God. Aunt Sharon in the good chair with her ankles crossed, Carol on the love seat, Denny standing against the kitchen counter with his coat still on, which is how Denny attends every function on Earth. Theo would not look at anybody. Bex and Sam came in late, at 10 to 7, straight from the barn, still arguing pleasantly about where the bar goes, and they ate standing up, and were gone again by past to go lock the place up. Nobody had told them anything, and I have thanked God more than once that my niece was not in that room for what came next. It was polite in there. That is the thing nobody understands about a family like mine. It was warm and it smelled good, and people laughed at Paul's story about the ice fishing shack going through the ice, and Margie refilled water glasses. And not one person in that room had done anything that a court would call wrong. I ate. I said the beans came out too salty. Sharon told me I looked tired. Then Dorothy came in from the kitchen with a dish towel over her shoulder and tapped the side of her glass with a spoon, twice, exactly the way she opens a committee meeting, and the room went down to nothing. She said, "Before dessert, Charlie has something she'd like to say." She had put me on the agenda. Of course she had. I stood up. I put both hands on the back of my chair, because that is what you hold on to, and I used the voice I use at 7 in the morning when I hand a patient off to the next nurse. Flat and clear, and slow enough that nobody has to ask me to repeat anything. I said, "I'm not going to apologize." Dorothy started to speak, and I kept going. Not louder, just steadily, the way you keep going. I said, "On the 31st of August 2021, Dad sat in Dr. Petrakis's office in Eau Claire and turned down the third valve surgery. He did that. Not me. I drove him, and he told me again in the parking ramp on the way home. He was 78, and he was completely himself, and Petrakis went back at him twice more with me standing in the doorway, and he said no every time. I said, in February of 2022, he asked to have the defibrillator turned off. He signed the request himself, in his own hand, in this handwriting you all know, with a cardiologist and a hospice nurse who was not me in the room, and it was the device clinic that did it. And it took about as long as it takes to check a blood pressure. That device had been shocking him. 6 times in one night in January, and every one of them knocked him against the rail. He told them to stop it. He was allowed to. I said, "I am his healthcare agent. It is on paper in a folder in the second drawer in my kitchen." I never used it. Not one time. I never had to make a single decision for that man, because he never once lost the ability to make them for himself. Nobody said anything. Paul set his fork down on the edge of his plate. Margie said, "Well," and then did not say anything else, which for Margie is an event. Carol started to cry into a napkin. Jerry was watching his wife, and I said the last part, the part I had promised. He asked me not to tell you. I asked him twice. I asked him to let Petrakis explain it to all of you, And he said no. And the last real thing my father ever asked me was one short sentence. Don't make them carry it. He said it twice. I did what he asked for 4 years. And then I looked at my sister, who was standing in her own dining room with a dish towel still over her shoulder, and I said the 3 words that took it all apart. He was wrong. Dorothy did not shout. My sister has never shouted in her life. She stood there with one hand on the back of Aunt Sharon's chair and her chin going, and what came out of her was small, and it was the only unplanned thing I have ever heard her say. Did he ask for me? I said yes. I said, every day. 3 days. He asked for you in the morning and after lunch, and again at night. And then I gave them the rest of it. The part that was actually mine. Because if I was going to open that room, I was not going to open it selectively. I said, on the 8th of March, you called me from the parking lot at 9 at night. You asked me if he was awake. He was awake. He was lying there with the blinds open waiting for you. And I told you he was asleep. And I told you to come tomorrow, because you sounded like you could not walk through that door, and I thought I was buying you one more night of sleep. He went under at 4 in the morning and he never came back up. That one is mine. Not yours. Mine. My sister sat down. She sat down in our father's chair, which nobody has sat in for 4 years, and I do not think she knew she had done it. She put her hand over her mouth and made a sound I have heard maybe 200 times in my career, and never once from her. Nobody moved. Nobody went to her. Which tells you a great deal about that family. And then, because she is who she is, she got her face back inside of a minute and said, into the table, that doesn't change the vote. I said, I know it doesn't. And then I told them the only thing I had come there to decide. I said, I'm not apologizing for a decision he made. And I'm not calling Bex to tell her I'm working that day. If she asks me why I'm not there, I'll tell her the truth. One time, quietly, and then I'll leave it alone forever. Margie, who had been reaching for the coffee pot, said, so that's a no on the apology. And I loved her a little for it. Because she was drowning and she reached for the only thing she has ever known how to hold, which is procedure. I said, nobody votes on the people they actually love, Margie. Then I got my coat. I walked out of that house having lost my father's last request, the version of him that 11 people had loved for 4 years, my only sister, and the seat I had spent 3 weeks pretending I did not want. That is what it cost. I want to be honest that it was not nothing. Bex came to my kitchen on the 10th of March at 6:40 in the morning, and she did not take her jacket off. She sat down across from me and said, Theo told me there was a vote. Theo had called her the night of the supper, shaking, and told her the whole thing about her grandfather, so she already had half of it. I had 2 seconds to decide what kind of woman I was going to be, and I had already spent 3 weeks getting ready for them. I did not pick up my phone. I never showed her a thread, a screenshot, or a name. I said, there was. On the 15th of February. It came out 11 to 2, and I was still in the thread by accident, so I read it while it happened. I'm not asking you to do anything, Bex. I'm not asking you to fix it, and I'm not asking you to pick. I only told you because you asked me a direct question, and I am done lying to people to keep a room comfortable. She sat there. She did not cry, and she did not swear, and I watched my niece's face do the thing her grandfather's face used to do, which is go completely still while the whole machine runs underneath. It took maybe 4 minutes. My kitchen clock is loud. Then she took her phone out of her jacket pocket and put her elbows on my table and started typing, right there, in front of me. And I turned my chair so that I could not see the screen, because it was not mine to see. She read it out loud when she was done, in a level voice, like a woman reading a grocery list. Hi everyone. I hear there was a vote about my wedding. Nobody asked me, so here's mine. You don't get to vote on the people you love. The 2 who said no are coming. The rest of you can let me know if you'd like to be invited back. Then she hit send and put the phone face down on the table between us and asked me if I had any more of that coffee. I did not look at that phone once. I looked at her. 11 people went very quiet and it lasted 3 weeks. Here is what 3 weeks of quiet actually looks like in a town of 4,000 people. Paul came out to the garage on a Tuesday and stood there for 3 minutes without saying one word and then said, "I should have called you in 2022, and then went and put a new latch on my back gate that I had not asked him to fix." Carol cried on my porch and could not finish a sentence. Trish left a pan of bars on the seat of my truck with a note that said, "I'm sorry, that's all, I'm sorry." Kyle sent a thumbs up to nothing in particular. Aunt Sharon called the landline, which nobody has called since 2019, and said she had voted the way Margie told her the family was leaning and that she had not understood what she was voting on. And she is 66, and she was ashamed, and I told her to come to the wedding. 7 of them came to me in person. 4 never said anything at all, and 2 of those 4 still say good morning to me in the narthex like the whole thing never happened, because that is how a small town survives itself. Denny did not buy an iPhone. Then I did the hardest thing in this entire story, and it was not at that supper. I drove into town on the 20th and sat down across from my niece and told her to take it back. Not the invitation, the ledger. I said, "Your mother told me it wasn't personal, it was just what everybody wanted, and I want you to hear how easy that sentence is to say. Don't you ever get to use it. Don't run a count on your own wedding day." Bex argued with me for about 10 minutes and then set her own terms, which were not a vote and were not a majority and were not a thread. Anybody who wanted to come could come, and they could tell me so themselves. Out loud, with their mouth, to my face. Her mother came on the last day of March. Dorothy stood on my porch, on the second step again, and said, "I have been angry at you since the second I sat down in that parking lot, and I think I always knew." It was not an apology. It was not even close to a good one, but it was the first true sentence my sister had said to me in 4 years, and I took it, and I told her I would see her at the church. We did not hug. Dorothy never pulled $1 of what she had put into that barn, and I do not think that was generosity so much as pride. The parish still votes on everything, including the Easter breakfast menu, and Margie still counts. Nothing about Vernon Falls changed. The wedding was the 11th of April, and I still had a cedar chest in the back of my truck. The Hollis barn has a dirt apron and bad lighting and 72 folding chairs, and there was no seating chart, because Beck said she was not spending 1 hour of her life ranking people. Denny and Theo carried the chest in before anybody arrived and set it in the corner by the doors with the lid propped open, and it held the cards, and by 9 o'clock that night it was full. Theo held a chair for me in the second row at the church and told a cousin it was taken. I read the passage my niece picked out, which I had finally said yes to in the last week of March, and my voice went once, on the second line, and then it was fine. Dorothy sat in the front row in a navy dress and we did not talk much, and that was all right, and it is still all right. Before Bex went out through the barn doors, she crouched down and ran her thumb over the pencil on the underside of that lid, where her grandfather wrote her name in September of 2021, 2 days after he decided how he was going to die. She stood up and said, "He knew, huh?" I said, "He knew." I spent 4 years believing that silence was the kindest thing I had left to give anybody, and it turns out silence is not a gift at all. It is only a bill, and somebody you love eventually has to pay it. That's my story. One thread, 11 to 2, and a bride nobody thought to ask. If you are holding a truth right now to keep everybody else comfortable, look hard at what it is costing the person you think you are protecting. Say it kindly. Say it once. Then let it be. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.